It was a dry, dusty afternoon in Tikrit, a small city beside the Tigris River, when young Saddam first understood something deep about power, a power that would shape his future. He was 11 years old, wearing a simple white shirt and worn-out sandals, his dark hair flattened by the sun. As he walked beside his older brothers toward the primary school, the hot wind carried the sound of a distant political rally, flags fluttering like restless birds. In that moment, he glanced at the flags, bright with red, white, black, and green stripes, feeling a strange mix of pride and unease. His father had often spoken of destiny, of their family's past and humble hopes for the future. But today, Saddam felt destiny stirring in the air. Inside the schoolyard, the principal, a stern man with deep-set eyes, read aloud from a dusty history book. He told of empires long fallen, of Mesopotamia's golden age, and of Arab tribes who once roamed freely across the sands. As the words washed over Saddam, he clenched his fists, trying to feel the weight of those ancient empires in his small hands. He didn't fully understand the complex words like empire or sovereignty, but he felt their power. A sense of belonging grew inside him, an unspoken need to be part of something greater than his own small world. Walking home after school, Saddam passed by a quiet canal, its water shimmering like a broken mirror under the fading sun. He paused, watching a small boat drift by, abandoned and tethered to a wooden post. The boat, half submerged, reminded him of how easily things can sink, how quickly hope can vanish. He thought of his bright, curious childhood dreams and wondered what it meant to stay afloat. That night, at home, his mother called him softly. "Saddam, come." She showed him a small notebook, his own thin handwriting marking the first words of a diary. Curious, he opened it to see his earliest memories, playing in the alleyways with friends, racing across sun-baked streets, and dreaming of flying above the world. He smiled as he read, and closed the notebook gently. Yet, in his heart, another dream had begun. The dream of shaping his own story, not just letting it drift away. Later, as he lay on a thin mattress under a simple blanket, Saddam listened to distant shouts, his brothers arguing, parents whispering about rent, about tomorrow's work. The night was silent except those voices, and it taught him something essential. True strength often moves in whispers, not shouts. And it is those quiet strengths that endure. From that moment, something changed in him. Not in leaps or loud bursts, but in small, steadfast steps. He began waking early, practicing reading from borrowed books by candlelight. He watched travelers passing through, geologists, soldiers, teachers, and wondered what paths they carried. Each evening, he traced routes on the dusty maps his father brought home, following strange lines that connected distant lands. He spoke less in the house and listened more, absorbing, learning, watching. Something hard and silent was forming inside him, ambition, like a seed split open by the harsh Iraqi sun. By the time Saddam reached his teenage years, the political world around him was already burning. Iraq was a nation stitched together by old borders and older grudges. Tribes, religions, and foreign rulers had all left their scars. And now a storm was forming. The streets of Baghdad whispered names like Ba'ath and freedom, with both fear and hope. Posters appeared on old walls. Men with strong jaws and burning eyes promised justice and glory. Saddam, now a tall young man with focused eyes and a silent walk, watched every change like a hawk from a rooftop. He didn't shout slogans or wave flags. Instead, he listened. He read old newspapers. He remembered names. And slowly, he began to understand how power moved, not just with bullets, but with silence, loyalty, and fear. He was just 20 years old when he joined the Ba'ath Party. At first, it was simple. Small meetings in hidden rooms, candles flickering over maps and plans, voices low and steady. But Saddam never came just to listen. He came to learn and to rise. When a senior member once asked him, "Why are you here?" Saddam replied without hesitation, "To build a country that doesn't kneel." The man stared at him for a long time before nodding. That night, for the first time, Saddam held a gun. It felt cold in his hands, but familiar, like a tool meant to shape things. In 1959, he was chosen for something greater, to help assassinate Prime Minister Abdul Karim Qasim, a leader who had betrayed the Ba'ath's trust. The mission was dangerous. They studied Qasim's route carefully, every turn his car took, every soldier guarding him. On the day of the attack, Saddam waited in the shadows, his breath steady, a scarf hiding his face. When the shots rang out, chaos exploded. People screamed, windows shattered, and blood painted the dusty road. Qasim survived, but Saddam did not stay to watch. He ran. Wounded, hunted, and bleeding, he crossed the river, hid in barns, and fled to Syria. That moment, though a failure, marked him. He was no longer just a young man from Tikrit. He was now a name spoken in secret, a face marked by the regime, and a voice whispered in growing circles of revolution. In exile, Saddam changed. He studied more deeply, reading about Stalin, Nasser, and the cold mechanics of fear and loyalty. He saw how men built empires not by kindness, but by control. He sent letters back home, coded, careful, and always commanding. "Do not forget the plan," he would write. "We are not here to follow. We are here to create." Friends began calling him the engineer, for the way he built loyalty like bridges, strong, unseen, and ready for war. Years later, in the late 1960s, Saddam returned to Iraq. The Ba'ath had seized power, and he rose quickly, first in the shadows, then in the open. He didn't need speeches. His silence said enough. When he walked into a room, even senior generals paused. His eyes held a kind of quiet calculation, a cold understanding of men's weaknesses. He knew who wanted power, who feared pain, who would betray, and he used it all. By 1979, Saddam was ready. President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr resigned, and Saddam took the chair. No vote, no debate. The television cameras were turned on. Saddam sat with his cigar, a half smile on his lips, and calmly read out a list of names. Enemies of the revolution, he claimed. Each name was followed by a silence more terrifying than any shout. One by one, those men were taken away. Some cried, some protested, but most just looked down. Within days, they disappeared, forever. That was Saddam's message to Iraq. Power is not shared. It is taken, kept, and never questioned. But even as fear grew, so did his dreams. He built palaces with golden ceilings and deep green gardens. He ordered schools and hospitals, gave speeches about unity and destiny. Iraq, he once said, must walk like a lion among wolves. Children memorized his name. Artists painted him like a king. Coins bore his face. But deep behind the walls, something darker grew. Whispers of torture, secret prisons, and cruel orders moved through the city like ghosts in the night. Saddam knew. He heard every whisper, and he smiled. In the early 1980s, Saddam Hussein stood on the rooftop of one of his presidential palaces, staring across Baghdad's dusty skyline. Below him, traffic moved slowly, and beyond that, the desert stretched endlessly, golden and cruel. But Saddam's eyes were fixed west, beyond Iraq's border, toward a growing storm. His gaze was on Iran. The Islamic Revolution had shaken the region, and Saddam believed the chaos next door was his opportunity to rise further. He told his generals, "Iran is weak. We strike now, and Iraq becomes the sword of the Arab world." His voice was firm, his words like prophecy. And so began the war that would bleed two nations. The Iran-Iraq War, which started in 1980, was supposed to be short. Saddam had promised a quick victory. He would take control of disputed territory, crush the revolutionary regime, and return as a hero. But wars, like deserts, are never predictable. The battlefields turned into hell, trenches filled with water and death, skies dark with burning oil, and fields littered with bodies. For 8 long years, the war dragged on. Thousands of young men on both sides died. Mothers buried sons. Cities crumbled. But Saddam refused to stop. He appeared on TV in full military uniform, smiling, giving medals, hugging soldiers. "Victory," he said, "is not measured by time, but by will." Behind closed doors, however, his face changed. He grew more silent, more suspicious. He questioned everyone, his ministers, his guards, even his own family. If someone hesitated in answering, they disappeared. If someone blinked the wrong way, they vanished. In the secret prisons, screams became part of the night. Saddam kept a tight circle, and even in that circle, no one truly felt safe. Fear was now his most loyal soldier. When the war finally ended in 1988, there was no victory parade. Iraq was deeply in debt. Cities lay in ruins. The people were tired, broken, and poorer than ever before. Yet Saddam declared it a divine win. He had survived, and that was enough. But even in the shadow of war, he made a decision that would stain his legacy forever. In the northern mountains, Kurdish villages had long sought independence. They had rebelled, spoken out, and some had even sided with Iran during the war. Saddam ordered Operation Anfal, an attack not just on fighters, but on civilians. Villages were bombed, families vanished, and in Halabja, chemical gas rained down on children. It was one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Pictures of babies frozen in sleep, mothers holding lifeless children, shook the world. But inside his palace, Saddam called it necessary. He believed Iraq must be united, and unity had a price. In the years that followed, Saddam tried to rebuild. He held grand parades, opened new highways, and built a massive mosque, the largest in Baghdad, with golden domes and his name etched in stone. He published books under his own name, romantic tales of power and resistance. Television channels played songs praising him. But underneath the surface, cracks widened. The economy suffered. People whispered. And Saddam grew more desperate to prove strength. In 1990, he made a bold move. Iraq invaded Kuwait. Within hours, Iraqi tanks rolled through the desert and took control of the small oil-rich country. Saddam announced Kuwait was Iraq's 19th province. The world watched in disbelief. Leaders across the globe condemned the act. The United Nations demanded withdrawal, but Saddam stood firm. "We will not kneel," he said in a televised speech, dressed again in military uniform, pointing a finger toward the West. The U.S. and its allies responded with force. In January 1991, the Gulf War began. Airstrikes pounded Baghdad. Missiles lit the night sky. Iraqi soldiers, unprepared and poorly equipped, surrendered in thousands. Bridges collapsed. Power plants burned. Saddam, however, survived. He remained in power, sitting beneath portraits of himself, calling the war a conspiracy, even as his country crumbled. After the war, sanctions were placed on Iraq, harsh ones. Food and medicine became scarce. Hospitals ran out of supplies. Children died of curable diseases. The people suffered. Yet Saddam continued to build statues, print money with his face, and host grand military parades. He never apologized. He never admitted failure. In his eyes, He was still the guardian of Iraq, still the lion surrounded by wolves. By the late 1990s, Saddam Hussein ruled a nation that had become a shell of its former self. The once bustling streets of Baghdad were now quiet and crumbling. Children played beside broken fountains, and families lined up for bread with ration cards in hand. Sanctions imposed by the United Nations were slowly choking the Iraqi people. And yet, Saddam remained defiant. He walked the halls of his palaces surrounded by golden chandeliers and marble floors, while outside, the people struggled to survive. In his speeches, he spoke of dignity, resistance, and victory. But in private, his world was shrinking. More of his closest advisors had turned into ghosts, removed, executed, or silently replaced. The man who had once ruled with brutal confidence now ruled with desperate fear. Inside his bunkers, Saddam sat for hours watching old footage of himself, riding horses, shaking hands with world leaders, standing tall before rows of cheering soldiers. He seemed to live in memory more than reality. His sons, Uday and Qusay, now acted as his eyes and fists across the country, ruthless, unpredictable, and feared even more than their father. Uday, especially, gained a reputation for sadism. His wild temper and uncontrollable behavior earned him the nickname, the Butcher of Baghdad. Yet Saddam kept them close. Blood was loyalty, and loyalty was survival. Meanwhile, the West was watching. Rumors grew louder. Saddam was rebuilding weapons of mass destruction. He was hiding something. He was dangerous. In 2002, American President George W. Bush stood before the world and declared that Iraq was part of an axis of evil. The tension returned. The air grew thick with uncertainty. The memories of 9/11 were still fresh, and Saddam, once an ally to the West against Iran, was now painted as a threat to global peace. Saddam responded with boldness. He allowed UN inspectors into the country but played a dangerous game, delaying, distracting, denying. He believed, perhaps wrongly, that the West would not dare attack again. He thought the memory of the Gulf War, with its high cost, would keep them at bay. But in March 2003, the sky over Baghdad once again lit up with fire. The US-led invasion had begun. Missiles thundered down on government buildings, military bases, and communication centers. Shock and awe. In those first days, the Iraqi army barely resisted. Soldiers fled. Whole divisions collapsed. The streets were filled with smoke and silence. Statues of Saddam were pulled down by Iraqis and U.S. tanks alike. The fear that once froze, the nation began to break. But Saddam was nowhere to be found. He had vanished. No public message, no final stand. The man who had ruled with an iron hand had disappeared into the dust. For months the world searched. Posters with his face were hung across Iraq. Wanted, Saddam Hussein, dead or alive. The U.S. military raided farms, homes, mosques, and bunkers. Dozens of his top men were captured or killed, but Saddam remained a ghost, moving, hiding, changing safe houses almost every night. He grew a thick beard, wore simple clothes, and lived in underground holes and small village homes. He trusted only a few, and even they lived in fear. Then, in December 2003, near the small town of Ad-Dar, soldiers found him. It wasn't a grand scene. It wasn't a palace or a battlefield. It was a narrow hole in the ground beside a mud brick house. They called it a spider hole. Inside it was Saddam, tired, thin, and silent. His hair was gray, his eyes distant. There were no guards, no weapons, no grand escape. Just a man who had once ruled a nation, now blinking into the flashlights of young soldiers. They pulled him out. He did not fight. He did not speak. He simply looked around, as if trying to understand what moment he was in. The image of that capture spread around the world. The Lion of Iraq, the self-declared sword of the Arabs, had been found not in glory, but in hiding. He was taken to a U.S. base. There he was examined, questioned, and eventually put on trial. The court proceedings were televised. Iraqis watched silently as the man who had controlled every part of their lives now stood in a cage, answering to others. He denied all charges. He called the court a joke, the invasion illegal. But the evidence was clear. Witnesses described the horrors of his rule. Survivors from Halabja, from prisons, from war zones spoke in voices still trembling with memory. The trial ended with a sentence: death by hanging.